There is a grizzly bear lying dead in the backcountry of Yellowstone, and nothing in the record says that should be possible. Not old, not starved, not shot. A healthy adult, hundreds of pounds of muscle and bone, an animal that sits at the very top of everything that lives in these mountains. Wolves step around it. Elk run from it. A full-grown grizzly in the Northern Rockies has no natural predator. That is not a figure of speech. That is what the biology says. Once a grizzly reaches its full size, there is supposed to be nothing left in North America that hunts it. And yet here it is, dead in the grass, with wounds on it that came from something alive. For years, the people who study these bears have been finding them like this. Cubs gone from a den with no sign of sickness. Young bears killed and half-eaten in the open. Big males turning up with injuries no elk and no fall could explain. The population is climbing, the range is spreading, and underneath all of it, something is quietly killing the one animal that is not supposed to have anything to fear. By the end of this, you are going to know what it is. And it is not a wolf. And it is not a person. And it is not some animal that came back from the edge of the map. The thing hunting the grizzlies of Yellowstone has been here the entire time, in plain sight, and almost nobody wanted to say its name out loud. Stay with me, because the answer changes how you see every bear in that park. Let me tell you where these bears came from first, because you cannot understand what is killing them without understanding how close they came to being gone. Before 1800, before the wagon trails and the survey lines, there were something like 50,000 grizzly bears spread across the western half of what is now the United States. They ranged out onto the Great Plains. They followed the rivers. They were, for a long stretch of this continent's history, simply a fact of the land, the way weather is a fact. Then came the guns, and the traps, and the poison, and the cattle. Within a little more than a century, that entire world was pulled down to almost nothing. By the time the federal government listed the grizzly as threatened in 1975, the number left in the lower 48 states had fallen to somewhere between 700 and 800 bears. In the Yellowstone country specifically, the estimates ran even lower. Some counts put it at around 136 bears left in and around the park. A few hundred at the most. An animal that had once owned half a continent was down to a last handful, backed into the high country around 2 national parks, hanging on. And then something happened that almost never happens. They came back. Slowly at first, then steadily, the greater Yellowstone grizzly population began to climb. Protected from hunting, watched over by one of the longest-running large mammal studies in the world, the bears started to fill the country back up. By recent counts, the greater Yellowstone population sits at roughly 1,000 bears, up from the last desperate few hundred. They now occupy nearly all of the suitable habitat inside their core recovery zone, and they have pushed far past its edges, tripling the size of the ground they walk since the early 1980s. Wildlife managers have watched the recovery reach what they describe as a plateau, the country steadily filling up with bears. This is one of the great conservation stories on the continent. People have spent their entire careers on it, and it is real. The bears are back, but here's the thing that gets lost inside a success story like that. When you take an animal that was nearly wiped out and you let it recover all the way to the edges of the land that can hold it, you do not just get more bears. You get more bears pressed up against each other. You get a landscape that is filling and then full. And a full country does something to the animals inside it that an empty one never did. Hold on to that idea, because it is the whole story. But it is not where the researchers started. For a long time, when a grizzly turned up dead in a way that made no sense, they went looking for something else entirely. The first suspect was the obvious one, the wolf. You have to remember the timing. Wolves were gone from Yellowstone for most of the 20th century, hunted and trapped out until the last packs were gone. Then, in 1995, they were brought back, reintroduced, released into a park that had spent decades learning to live without them. And they thrived. They spread. They multiplied. And suddenly the grizzlies of Yellowstone were sharing their ground with a pack hunter for the first time in living memory. It seemed to fit. Here was a new predator, arriving right around the same time people started paying very close attention to how bears were dying. Wolves hunt in numbers. They are relentless. They are smart. And they do, in fact, kill bears. That part is not a myth. Biologists in Yellowstone have documented it directly. On rare occasions, when wolves and grizzlies come into conflict, it turns lethal, and when it does, the victims are almost always cubs. The National Park Service has confirmed that wolves can and do kill grizzly cubs. A female grizzly with young trying to move through wolf country or trying to take over a wolf's kill is in real danger, not so much for herself as for the small ones trailing behind her. There is footage of it. Guides who have spent decades in that park have watched wolf packs surround a bear and escort it out of an area, driving it off their ground. So for a long time, the story held together. The wolves came back and the bears started dying. And the wolves were the reason. It was clean. It had a villain. It even had a moral, if you wanted one, about what happens when you put two apex predators in the same valley. The trouble is that when the scientists actually followed the evidence, the wolf story started to come apart in their hands. Because here is what the long observation actually showed. Yes, wolves kill grizzly cubs, but only a few. When researchers tallied up the confirmed cases of wolves killing bears over years of watching, the number of cub mortalities they could pin on wolves was small, a handful. The two species, it turned out, mostly go out of their way to avoid each other. They share the same country, but they use it at different hours and in different ways, stepping around one another far more often than they collide. Neither one wants a real fight, because a real fight means injury. An injury in the wild is a slow death sentence for a predator that needs to be at full strength to eat. And then there was the carcass. This is where it gets strange. Everyone assumed the wolves ruled the kill, that the pack brought down the elk and the bear had to fight its way in. It is almost exactly backwards. In Yellowstone's bear country, when a wolf pack makes a kill, a grizzly very often simply walks up and takes it. In one remote valley, researchers found that across the warm months, nearly every single wolf kill ended up in the possession of a grizzly bear. One biologist watched a single bear hold off 24 wolves at a carcass and eat while the whole pack waited. The wolves usually cannot drive the bear away. They threaten, they dart in, and then they give ground. There is a scene that plays out in the park most springs, and people who guide there have watched it more than once. A wolf pack works for hours to bring down a bull elk. They have earned it, in every sense an animal can earn anything. And then a big grizzly comes down off a slope, unhurried, and the whole pack of them, 6, 8, a dozen animals, can do nothing but circle and snarl and wait while the bear feeds on what they killed. There is even an order to who gets the spoils among the bears themselves. When more than one grizzly shows up, the biggest males tend to end up with the carcass, even when a younger bear or a female found it first. The wolves are not the tyrants of that landscape. They are closer to its workforce, and much of what they produce is taken from them. That is not the profile of the thing that is killing the grizzlies. That is the profile of an animal the grizzly robs for a living. The wolf, it turned out, was mostly a witness. Something else was doing the killing, and it had been doing it the entire time, right in front of everyone, while the cameras pointed at the wolves. If you are finding this as unsettling as I did the first time I understood it, do me one small favor and subscribe, because this channel goes to the places in the wild that most people would rather not look at directly. And this is the kind of story you will want to be here for when the next one drops. Now, let me take the wolf out of the picture completely and show you what is left. Start with the cubs, because the cubs are where the pattern is clearest and where it is hardest to look at. A grizzly cub is born in the dead of winter, in the den, blind and nearly hairless and no bigger than a small loaf of bread. It spends its first year shadowing its mother, learning the country from her, protected by 300 or 400 pounds of animal that will do almost anything to keep it alive. On paper, that cub has one of the safest childhoods in the American wilderness. Its mother is the most dangerous thing in the forest, and that is exactly why the truth is so hard to accept. Because the most common killer of a grizzly cub in Yellowstone is not the wolf, and it is not the cougar, and it is not the winter. It is another grizzly bear. It is, most often, a large adult male. They call it infanticide, and the plain version of it is this. A big male grizzly will find, hunt down, and kill the cubs of a female he did not father. Not by accident, not in some blind rage, as a strategy, because a female with cubs will not breed. She is spending everything she has on the young she already has. But if those cubs die, she comes back into breeding condition, sometimes within days. And the male who killed them is standing right there, ready to father the next litter. His own. Read that again and let it settle. The single greatest threat to the next generation of Yellowstone grizzlies is the current generation of Yellowstone grizzlies. The thing hunting the cubs is the same species, wearing the same coat, walking the same trails. And the studies bear this out in a way that is almost impossible to argue with. In one long-running research population, when scientists tracked when the cubs were dying, they found that around 80% of all cub deaths happened during the mating season. Not the hungry season, not the deep cold. The mating season, when the big males are on the move looking for females. Most, if not all, of those deaths were infanticide. Males killing the young of other males to clear the way for their own. For most of us, this stays an abstraction, a thing in a study, a line on a chart. But on one spring day it happened in the open, in front of a crowd, and it is worth telling you exactly how it looked. On the 22nd of May, in 2022, visitors in Yellowstone watched a very large adult male grizzly kill a young bear in plain view. The animal that died was not a tiny cub. It was roughly the size of a grown person, something on the order of 150 pounds, and the boar that killed it did so with a speed and a power that the people watching described as sickening to see. And here's the detail that stays with you. The young bear's own mother was there, and she was also seen going at her offspring, as though trying to drive it away from the danger, unable to stop what was coming. Less than a month later, in the middle of June, another female known to the park, a blonde-coated bear the regulars had named, almost certainly lost all three of her cubs the same way, to a big male. One of the most experienced watchers of these bears put it bluntly, a male grizzly is the single leading cause of death for baby bears. Not disease, not starvation, not the wolf. The father of the species. The females know. They have always known. This is the part that stays with you. Researchers looking at how grizzly mothers move through the day have found that females with cubs behave differently from every other bear in the population. They shift their whole schedule. While the big males are most active in the low light of dawn and dusk, mothers with young push more of their movement into the open middle of the day. The leading explanation is brutally simple. They are staying out in the daylight, on purpose, to avoid running into the males who would kill their babies in the dark. Think about what that means. Every mother grizzly in Yellowstone is arranging her entire life around the threat of her own kind. She is not hiding from wolves. She is not hiding from us. She is hiding her children from the fathers of the species. That is the shape of the danger, and it was there in the data the whole time, waiting for someone to say it plainly. But it does not stop at the cubs. This is where the story gets darker than most people are ready for, and where the title's promise finally comes all the way true. Because it is not only the small and the young that die this way. A grizzly bear will kill and eat another grizzly bear. Not often in front of witnesses, but it happens, and it is documented. And the researchers who study these animals have long stopped being surprised by it. A dominant male will kill a smaller or weaker bear over territory, over a carcass, over a female, over the simple fact that the country is only so big and there are only so many good places to feed. And once the killing is done, the meat is meat. Cannibalism among bears is real. Younger bears, subadults just pushed out on their own and not yet big enough to defend themselves, are the most likely to die this way, killed and consumed by an adult of their own kind. Sit with that middle stage of a bear's life for a moment, because it is the most dangerous stretch of all and almost nobody thinks about it. A young grizzly gets about 2, sometimes 3 years with its mother, and then she pushes it away. She has to. She is ready to breed again, and she cannot do that with last year's cub still trailing her. So the young bear is turned out into the world, on its own for the first time, still growing, not yet big, not yet wise about which valleys belong to which older animal. It has to find country nobody bigger is already holding. And in a landscape that is filling up, that country barely exists. So the young bear wanders into ground a dominant boar considers his, and it does not know the rules yet, and it is not large enough to argue. That is the animal most likely to end up dead. Not the frail, not the sick, the young and the strong. At the one moment in their lives when their size has not yet caught up to the danger they are walking into. So picture the animal you started with, the dead grizzly in the grass, hundreds of pounds of it with wounds on its body from something alive. For years the instinct was to look outward. What came in from outside and did this? What new thing arrived and broke the peace? And the answer, the entire time, was that nothing arrived. The predator at the top of the chain and the prey at the bottom of this particular story are the same animal. The grizzly's deadliest enemy is, and has always been, the grizzly. Right about here, I want to be honest with you about the edges of what we know, because a good story does not need to pretend to be tidier than the truth. This is the part where the clean answer starts to fray, and that is exactly what makes it worth telling. There is not one single cause pushing a bear to kill its own kind. There are at least 2 or 3, and they braid together in ways nobody has fully untangled. The first possibility is the one we have been building toward: breeding. The male kills to reproduce, to erase another male's line and start his own, and this is the driver behind most of the cub killing. This one has strong evidence behind it, but even here the researchers argue. There is real debate over exactly how it works, whether it is always outside males moving in, or whether any male will kill young he does not believe are his. The mechanism is not settled. The killing is. The second possibility is simpler and colder: food and space. A recovered population is a crowded population, and this is where that idea I asked you to hold on to finally pays off. Remember where we started. The bears filled up their core country and then kept pushing past its edges precisely because the middle was full. Nearly all the good habitat inside the recovery zone is occupied. A large share of the population now lives outside it, spilling into ranch land and river valleys, and the seams between one wild place and the next. Not because those places are better, but because home has no more room. The scientists tracking the recovery describe it reaching a plateau. The country as full of bears as the country can be, and a full country is a violent country. When every good feeding site is already claimed, every carcass becomes a flashpoint. When there is no empty valley for a young bear to slip into, every young bear is trespassing on someone. The pressure has nowhere to go but inward, into the bears themselves. This is not about breeding at all. This is about a landscape that has run out of room and the animals grinding against each other inside it. And it leads to a conclusion almost nobody wants to say out loud. It may be that the very success of the recovery, the thing generations of people gave their careers to, is part of what is turning the bears against each other. We did not save them into peace. We saved them into a crowd. And the third possibility is the one nobody can measure, which is that these two things feed each other, that a fuller country means more males crossing more paths, more contested ground, more young bears with nowhere safe to land, so that the recovery and the violence rise together, two sides of the same rising line. If that is true, then what looks like something going wrong in Yellowstone is actually something going right, pushed all the way to its limit. A population healthy enough, finally, to start turning its pressure inward. None of those explanations is comfortable. That is the point. There is no version of this where you get to feel good at the end. Here is what the biologists will tell you they still do not know for certain. They cannot always tell you, standing over a dead bear, exactly which of these forces killed it. They cannot give you a clean yearly count of how many grizzlies die at the hands of other grizzlies, because so much of it happens in the backcountry, unseen. The evidence scattered or eaten or gone before anyone finds it. What they can tell you is that it is common. Common enough that it shapes how the mothers live, Common enough that it sits among the leading causes of death for the youngest bears. Common enough that it should have been the first answer, not the last. The reason it was the last answer is us. It is easier to blame the wolf that just came back than to accept that the animal we saved has been doing this to itself all along. It is easier to look for a new villain at the edge of the map than to look at the bear in the middle of it. We wanted the grizzly to be the thing with no enemy, the untouchable king of the mountains, because that is the version that makes the rescue feel complete. And the bears never agreed to be that story. So let me take you back to where we began. There is a grizzly lying dead in the backcountry of Yellowstone. Hundreds of pounds of muscle and bone, an animal that sits at the top of everything that lives in these mountains and that died anyway at the hands of the only thing in this country strong enough to kill it. Not a wolf, not a hunter, not some ghost returned from the edge of the range. Another bear, bigger or hungrier or simply there first, and not far from that carcass. Right now, the rest of the story is still going on. A mother is walking her cubs through the open middle of the day, keeping to the light on purpose. Listening for the sound of a bigger animal in the low country, a young male, just pushed out on his own, is crossing ground he does not yet know how to hold, and he is not nearly as safe as his size makes him look. And somewhere in the high sage, a dominant boar is moving through country that is filling up faster than it can hold him, and he is the reason the mother stays in the daylight. They were here before the roads had names. They came back from almost nothing, against everything. And the country filled up around them, and now the danger is not out at the edges where we kept looking for it. The danger is walking beside them. It always was. The bears know this in a way we are only just admitting. And out there in the tall grass, in the long light of a Yellowstone evening, the biggest one is not resting. He is waiting. If you like this video, YouTube also thinks you're going to like this one on your screen. Go ahead and let it play.